A classic love story we all cried about. A beautiful story about love and loss during a journey to America aboard the Titanic. But did the Titanic actually hit an iceberg? And is it really the boat at the bottom of the ocean? This story is riddled with insurance scams and a grab for power. Follow me down the rabbit hole to find out more about the Titanic. Hey guys, welcome back to The Rabbit Hole. I'm your host, Dani, and today we are talking about the Titanic. I know. What kind of conspiracy theories behind the Titanic, right? We all know what happened. Unsinkable ship hit an iceberg and sunk. There's been movie after movie, made about it. Lots of books and things written about it. But are they telling the true story? Guys, I have a conspiracy theory about the Titanic. So, on April 14th and 15th, because it happened overnight into the next day, of 1912, during the maiden voyage of the Titanic from Southampton, England to New York City, New York, the British luxury passenger liner hit an iceberg and sank. So, let's learn a little bit of the statistics about this boat, right? The big numbers here. So it cost $7.5 million to build the Titanic. Of course, we're talking like the early 1900s, and so that's a lot of money. Depth at which the shipwreck lays currently is 12,600 feet. The length of the ship was 882 feet long. The maximum number of people it could carry was 3,547. However, when it actually left from Southampton, England, it only had 2,223 passengers, including the crew. And the lifeboats could only carry 1,178 people. So if you're doing the math, about half of the people could get on lifeboats, and that's about it. And out of those people that could get on lifeboats, because remember, most of them weren't totally full, 705 people actually survived the tragedy. So, I know, you're wondering what the heck kind of conspiracy theory am I going to come up with here? So of course, we have the forbidden love of Jack and Rose. And they had to find a way to survive. So they sunk the ship. The end. I'm just kidding. We have this guy, his name is Paddy Fenton. A lot of people called him Paddy the Pig. And when he was really old, he was getting really old. It was practically on his deathbed, but not quite, because he wasn't quite dying then. But he died soon after telling this story. He was telling the story that there was fire in the bunkers, and the bunkers were the tanks that they kept all the fuel in on the ship. And they said that there had been fires in the bunkers for a long time. And literally since they were loaded onto the ship, there was fires in the bunkers, which can't be good, right? If that's where all the fuel is kept, we should not have fires there. He said that once the ice cold water filled the ship and reacted with the bunker fire, it created an explosion, and that's what sunk the Titanic. He also claimed that the ships had been switched for an insurance scam. So what am I talking about? The ships were switched. What ships? So the Titanic actually had a sister ship called the Olympic. And the Olympic was the biggest ship of the time. And it was completed a year before the Titanic in 1911. And it was really hard to tell the difference between the two, because the conspiracy is that they did this on purpose. The Olympic was in this horrific accident. Horrific. It was in the water, and the HMS Hulk, which was a battleship, rammed into the Olympic. And neither one could really maneuver fast enough to avoid this collision, so it was like head on, and again, conveniently, right where the Titanic hit the iceberg is also the same place where the HMS Hulk hit the Olympic during the collision. It had a huge hole inside, and the force was so great that it actually disrupted the entire hole, and it would take so long and so much money to repair it. It didn't even make sense, right? And it would never again pass a board of trade inspection. So it would never again be able to be like a luxury liner, a passenger ship. It was done. So it didn't even make like a full voyage. It didn't really do anything. They just built this ship for it to be completely useless. But of course, the Royal Navy does what they do, and they investigated this collision and found that they were not guilty. So that since the Olympic was at fault, then the insurance wouldn't pay out for the Olympic for the collision, right? So they wouldn't pay the insurance money to repair the Olympic, or like just to completely total loss the Olympic and have like the money reimbursed to the owner of White Star Lines, who happened to be JP Morgan. I think it was really funny that the Royal Navy did the investigation and then found itself not guilty. So like, of course the Royal Navy's gonna be like, yeah, we didn't do it. It wasn't our fault. Even though I know that ships being on water is different than cars being on land, right? But the Hulk hit like head on, and the Hulk was also a total loss, like that. But with the Royal Navy finding that they were not at fault, the Hulk could get the insurance money. So anyway, so why do we care about the Olympic being in this crash? Well, because a lot of people say that a lot of work went into making the Olympic look exactly like the Titanic, and then they deliberately sunk what we would say is the Titanic, which happened to be the Olympic, as an insurance scam to get the money, right? Why is this said? Because there were some differences between these two ships. They were sister ships, not twin ships. So between 1911 and 1912, these differences kind of just began to disappear. For instance, there were some portholes on the Titanic that were in a distinct 5-hole pattern, whereas on the Olympic there was not. And so like it wasn't a pattern, there was just portholes in the Olympic. But by the end of the year being 1911, both the ships had the same exact 5-hole pattern. But when did the switch actually happen? So if they were just sister ships, they weren't twin ships, how did they do this behind everybody's back, right? How did they make these ships twins? Well, let me tell you. In March of 1912, so a month before the maiden voyage, the Olympic needed a propeller blade changed, and there was only one dry dock big enough to handle the size of the ship. So that was in Belfast in Ireland. So they took the ship over, let's change our propeller, right? This should have only taken 2 days. Which to me, like, this sounds crazy that it only takes 2 days to change this giant propeller on this boat, but I don't work on boats, so I don't know. But it should have taken only 2 days. Here, it took them a week to do this swap. Conveniently, over the weekend, this boat hung out in this dry dock, and that's when it's said to be changing all the things that the Olympic that was different from the Olympic to the Titanic, such as the lifeboats, life belts, letterheads, menus, things like that. So both boats use the exact same things, like similar, like the same plates. And on the plates was just a crest, and the crest just said White Star Line, so it didn't have the name of the boat, so they didn't have to change all of like the small things, because if you're gonna have two boats for the same star line, right, you just put the same, I don't know, plateware, silverware, cups, all that kind of stuff on the same boat. So they just had to change the things that had the Olympic title on it. So the lifeboats would have said the Olympic, they changed it to the Titanic, and then that was super easy, right? Now we don't have to worry about all that stuff. Nobody's the wiser. Now it's time for the sea trials, because the Titanic needs to do some sea trials in order to voyage from England to America. They need to get the inspections done. They need everything to be totally good so they can make their voyage, do their maiden voyage across the Atlantic. So another sketchy thing happened here, because there's always a sketchy thing when it comes to conspiracy theories. Sea trials usually last 2 full days, but for the Titanic, they only lasted about half a day. And the inspectors, like, this inspection was so superficial, the inspectors failed to realize that the boat was on fire. They honestly didn't even go into the engine room. And it was burning from the time they left Belfast. What is also kind of weird is that the engine room sailors all quit upon arrival. When they left Belfast, they went back to Southampton, and they all just quit. It's like they knew, like, the engines weren't brand new. This isn't a brand new ship. Something was fishy with this ship. Mind you, at the time that these sailors were quitting their jobs in the engine room, they were engine room sailors, and there was a lot of them because, I mean, look back at the time, but also just watch the movie The Titanic, and you can see how many people are feeding that engine coal all the time. You have to have shifts 24 hours a day, 7 days a week until you get to where you're going. There were at the time there were thousands of men without work because there was a coal strike in England. So many sailors were looking for work, and these men just like up and quit their jobs, willingly just gave their jobs away. Conveniently, they have all these other guys that are like, I need a job so bad. Like, I don't care what these sailors have to say about how weird, the weird stuff going on in this boat. I need the job. Here we go. So, then you have passengers that start canceling their trips. 55 passengers, mostly first class passengers, canceled their voyage, to include J.P. Morgan himself, who had said publicly that he was definitely going on the maiden voyage of the Titanic, which is an unsinkable ship. He canceled last minute because he was like, yeah, I'm sick. Guys, sorry, I can't go. Went ahead and took a trip to the south of France with his mistress instead, looking real sick. A New York Times journalist actually ran into him in the south of France, where he was completely healthy and didn't go on the maiden voyage of the Titanic that just happened to sink. Milton Hershey, also an American I don't know if he was a millionaire yet, but wealthy man in America, he also canceled his trip. Was like, yeah, I don't know, I just don't think I'm ready to leave yet.
Did you know that over 40% of Americans have a hard time swallowing pills? So when it's time to take your vitamins, large capsules and pills are out of the question. We know that gummy vitamins exist, but they're full of sugar, they get stuck in your teeth, and they only contain a fraction of the nutrients you need. Luckily, Easy Melts has discovered the ultimate vitamin sweet spot. Vitamins that melt in your mouth, taste like a treat, and are packed with nutrients ready for absorption, all without an ounce of sugar. For a limited time, Easy Melts is giving listeners a free 3-month supply of vitamin D3 with their first purchase. To claim your free D3 vitamins, visit try.easymelts.com/spring24. That's melts.com/spring24. Say goodbye to the old way of taking your vitamins and say hello to the easy way.
And as I said earlier with the statistics, the ship was only 3/4 full. Or 3/4. 2/3. Excuse me. The ship was only 2/3 the way full. Definitely room for a lot more people on this ship. But Thomas Andrews, the ship designer, was on board. So, obviously, there was some important people on board, but also, like, if they're gonna sink this ship, if this is really happening, the captain has to be on board. The captain has to be in on it, right? Like, he can't just, I don't know, it's just all too fishy for the captain to be like, oh, I didn't know that the whole ship was gonna go down. Enter the Californian. What is the Californian? The Californian is it's like a passenger cargo ship that up until very soon before the Titanic left, was stuck in port in London because there's a coal strike going on. They don't have coal. You know who owned the Californian? Mr. J.P. Morgan himself, the world-renowned banker that we all know him as, owns all these ships, which is odd in itself. And then he launches the Californian empty. This boat is empty, and he's like, hey, we need as much coal as possible because there's a coal strike. I don't know how he got it, but literally just sailed. They sailed as soon as possible. They're like, get all the coal, let's move. And all they had aboard the ship, conveniently, was 3,000 wool sweaters and blankets. And this ship just took off full speed ahead across the Atlantic until, oddly enough, there's a lot of coincidences here, guys. In the middle of the Atlantic, it just stopped. It just stopped moving. The captain was like, yeah, this is a good place, and I'm glad that we went full speed ahead until here. This is good. We're done. Like, stop moving. Everyone, we're just going to hang out in the Atlantic for a while. After being, like, rushed out of London, rushed to get all this coal, rushed to get these 3,000 wool sweaters and blankets aboard and nothing else. Mind you, this is a passenger cargo ship. It's literally made to carry all kinds of things to and fro. They're like, no, we're not putting anybody on the ship. We're just gonna put these blankets and sweaters, and that's all we need to go to America as fast as humanly possible. Wait, nope, stop. This is a good place. This is it. We're in the middle of the Atlantic. We're happy here. So then the Titanic takes off, right? Here we go. Maiden voyage on our way in this unsinkable ship to New York City. And people are really excited. I mean, there was a lot of really wealthy people on this boat. There was so many people were anxious to get on the boat because, like, it was supposed to be like one of the most luxurious ships at the time. Like, the wealthiest of the wealthy are like, I'm going. Here we go. They're so excited. So, on April 14th, 1912, and there were ice warnings. And the captain really didn't think much of it. He was like, oh yeah, ice warnings, whatever. But hitting an iceberg was really, really rare, and so he definitely didn't think much of the ice warnings. Yes, there's probably ice. It's April in the middle of the Atlantic. But there was black icebergs in the area, which, if you don't know what a black iceberg is, it's literally like a regular iceberg has melted, and it's melted enough to where the top isn't heavy enough anymore, and it flips over to where, like, because the bottom's heavier, and the underside of the ice is all black, and it's now on top. The iceberg literally melts until it flips over, and the black ice is on top, and that's called a black iceberg. And that is what the Titanic hit, was a black iceberg, and it tore a 350-foot gap in the side of the hull. Again, I might add, exactly where the Olympic had been hit by the HMS Hulk earlier in the story. So the Titanic was made up of 16 watertight compartments. Makes sense for any ship that's gonna sail across the sea that you want watertight compartments, because if something like this does happen, you just sail off a couple of them and you can sail for a long time. And the Titanic literally could have had water in any two of the compartments, two right next to each other, two on opposite ends of the boat. It didn't matter. Any two compartments, Titanic would have been just fine. However, the iceberg cut through 5 compartments. So here's a few strange things that happened during this whole thing. So the first SOS didn't actually go out until 35 minutes after the striking of the iceberg. Which, okay, maybe, like, you think you can get under control, but within minutes, like, you know how big this gash is, and you know, like, that as a captain, you know that your ship can only have water in 2 of the watertight compartments, not 5 of them. So that does not take you 35 minutes to figure out. Then, the first lifeboat wasn't launched until an hour and 25 minutes after the strike of the iceberg, which, again, you know you're going down by that point. They only had enough lifeboats for about half the people on board, and lifeboats were not full, which just seems odd. You already know, as the captain, again, that you don't have enough lifeboats for everybody, so I would be packing those things as full as possible and then putting more people in them. Like, I don't know, I would be overfilling them. It's just weird, right? But after the crew got home to England, they were not allowed to go straight home. So after there was only, I think only about 200 of the crew members, of the 700 crew members, survived and got to go home. And they were told when they did finally get back to England, like, hey, you're not going to talk to anybody about this. A high up White Star Line's official and a high up government official came, held them for 24 hours. Not nice accommodations, might I add. But they held them, and they're like, hey, yeah, if you talk to anybody about this, you're screwed. Which is why I think maybe Paddy the pig, who I talked about at the beginning of the story, wasn't actually on the boat. I think that he might have been, I don't know who he was, but he knew enough about the boat. So either he was one of the engine sailors that had quit prior, or he was on the boat and survived, or he just knew somebody that was on the boat. How do you know all this information, Paddy the pig? Because he was a sailor, so it makes sense. But Paddy the pig, at the time when we hear the interview, he actually lived in Australia. So did he just give up on England and go home? He was like, no thanks, guys. Like, this is too sketchy for me. So could J.P. Morgan have wanted the Titanic to sink for another reason outside of insurance money? Because if they really did switch the Titanic and the Olympic, and they sunk the Olympic, but it was really, like, they called it the Titanic, they would get the insurance money for that because it was an accident and he would get all his money back. It seemed like he wasn't planning on killing all these people. However, like, the lifeboat thing is kind of where I draw the line here, because obviously they sent the Californian out, and the Californian was near where the Titanic went down. But because they actually did strike an iceberg, which I don't think they were planning on actually hitting an iceberg at the time. I don't know how they were planning on making the ship sink, but I don't think they planned on hitting an iceberg. But because they did, it made the Titanic go just out of, like, just over the horizon, out of eyesight of the Californian, and so they didn't have help as quickly as they thought they would have help. Which is why we think that this whole insurance scam thing makes sense. But are there other reasons that Morgan wanted to sink the Titanic? Well, yes, I think so. Like I said before, you had all these wealthy people, like, jumping on board the Titanic. This is an unsinkable ship. This is the safest way we can get back to America from England. So let's go. I got 3 people I want to tell you about. 3 people. I got Jacob Astor, Isidore Strauss, and Benjamin Guggenheim. And these men were all Americans. Jacob Astor was thought to be one of the richest men in the world at the time, and he was definitely the wealthiest person on the Titanic. He was a self-made millionaire, a businessman, writer, inventor. Real estate is where he made most of his money. If you know the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, he started that. That's part of his real estate, is he opened this hotel. A couple fun facts about Jacob Astor, who did die up on the Titanic. He was said to have released all the dogs from the kennels on the Titanic. And his wife was pregnant at the time. So the reason he was in England is because he divorced his wife, which at the time you do not divorce your spouse. He divorced his wife. She did not die. And he got married to this new lady. And they were in England to try to outweigh or outstay the controversy of his divorce, right? But his wife got pregnant, and because she was pregnant, he was like, okay, we better go home. So he jumped aboard the Titanic because you can't sink it, and we're gonna be totally fine. His pregnant wife did get on a lifeboat, and she did survive. He kind of forced her to get on a lifeboat, and he wanted to get on the lifeboat, but whoever was loading that lifeboat said, absolutely not, women and children first. And he was like, yeah, totally get it. Women and children first. Let's go. And so he went ahead and released the dogs, hoping, maybe they can survive. But as we know, a lot of people did freeze to death in the water because it was freezing cold and there were icebergs in it. Isidore Strauss was also on the Titanic. He was a co-owner of the Macy's department store with his brother. And if you remember in the Titanic movie with Leonardo DiCaprio, right? Because there's been a lot that have been made. Him and his wife were the old couple, like in their bed, cuddling each other while the ship was going down. Because, and they say this is like a true love and devotion. Like water can't sink love, or whatever has been said about the two of them, Ida and Isidore Strauss. Because Ida refused to leave Isidore, and she offered her seat to her maid, gave her maid her fur coat, was like, I don't need this anymore, here you go, gave her fur coat, and put her on the lifeboat. Because at the time, and I don't know if like Jacob Astor and Isidore Strauss were just like on two separate sides of the boat or what was going on, because the person that was loading that lifeboat was like, hey Isidore, if you want like the seat on this boat, you should absolutely take it. And he was like, no way, there are women and children and they still need to get aboard the lifeboats. So here's like two different sides of the boat, I guess. I don't know. And they did end up dying, of course, on the Titanic. And then you have Benjamin Guggenheim. His wife did not get on the boat. I don't know. She wasn't there. But he had like his valet. He had like people that worked with him, and they all died together as well. But there's not as much known about Benjamin Guggenheim. It is said that he boarded the Titanic to show off his money, that he got this first class ticket and he stayed in this beautiful suite, and he was just like trying to show off his money, right? But why don't we like these people? Why would JP Morgan want to kill these people off? You know, you got the insurance money, cool. You also have these other people that it would be really handy if they just weren't here anymore. So let's go ahead and sink the Titanic, get the insurance money, and kill these people. Why? Well, it's because they oppose the Federal Reserve. And J.P. Morgan stood to make a lot of money from the Federal Reserve because what do we know about J.P. Morgan? Well, he owned banks. And at the time, banks were not federally backed. And we know, like, with all the insurances that came from the Great Depression, but there in 1907, there was a great panic because you had tiny little banks, like little town banks, and those banks, the way banks work is when you put your money in, they keep a little bit, but then they lend out your money, and when people pay back the money that they lent out, they charge the interest and the bank makes money. So the reserve that they keep, they actually invest that into, or they give it to like bigger banks. So the little town banks would give it to a city bank, and a city bank would give it to a bigger city bank, and the bigger city banks would give it eventually up to Wall Street. And people knew that this money wasn't like secure in these banks. So when people started panicking and they ran to their bank and they're like, I need to pull out all my money, the banks didn't have it. So the little town bank with, Joe Farmer, like panicking, like I need my money right now, that bank goes to the bigger city bank and was like, hey, city bank, I need the money right now. And that city bank's like, oh crap, I don't have it, all the way up the bank chain, all the way up to Wall Street. And they don't have the reserve funds, which will tank the stock market, right? So they had this panic and they're like, oh my God, what is going to happen if people keep panicking and trying to take all their money out of the bank, and then we don't have enough money at these banks to give all the people their money back. So JP Morgan was like, hey, we need this thing. They're going to call it the Federal Reserve, and it's going to be our reserve funds. So all these banks that are putting their reserve funds into other bigger banks, they don't have to do that anymore. They can just put it all into a Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is just there just in case, and they give us our money back. Of course, JP Morgan wanted it to be banker owned. The government wanted it to be government owned. There's so many conspiracy theories behind the Federal Reserve. I don't even have a tiny bit of time to get into it right now. Don't worry, we will. But it is said that these three men, Jacob Astor, Isidore Strauss, and Benjamin Guggenheim, were like, absolutely not. And if they had voted against the Federal Reserve, it would not be a thing. Too bad they died, because I don't want to get into the Federal Reserve right now. But anyway, they died. Federal Reserve's a thing. JP Morgan conveniently wasn't on the ship he swore up and down wouldn't sink. Like, what did he know? And did he warn his friend, Milton Hershey, hey, buddy, don't get on the Titanic. Something weird's about to go on. I don't know. What do you guys think? Do you think the Titanic was a conspiracy theory? Do you think that it just hit an iceberg and accidentally sunk and these guys just accidentally happened to die and it was no conspiracy and everything is just how the movie portrays it? And Rose ended up letting go of Jack even though she swore that she never would. You guys tell me what you think. I hope you liked this conspiracy theory. Stay skeptical, my friends, and I will see you next week. Hey guys, I'm still doing a giveaway, so if you want to win a free t-shirt, it says Stay Skeptical on the front, has the rabbit hole logo on the back. Please share my podcast out on your social media. Send me a screenshot so I don't miss you. I send you a shirt. And if you would like to just win a sticker, then please give us a rating and review. Again, send me a screenshot of it. Send me a DM with it. So that way I don't miss you and I can send it out. Because it does not tell me who gives me ratings and reviews. So you have to tell me so I can give you the sticker. And I really want to give you the sticker. They're really cool too. So send me screenshots, please, and I want to send you a sticker. If you want both, just do both things, and I'll send you a sticker. I'll send you a t-shirt. I'll send you a little thank you note, too. I appreciate you all, and I'll see you guys next week. If you like the show, please leave us a rating and review wherever you are listening. Follow us on Instagram at rabbit.holepodcast. The Rabbit Hole is an independent podcast with all research, writing, editing, and producing done by me, Dani Mercy. Special thank you to Zakar Valaha Music.